It's Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 1. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight might not be in a winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." This is the word of the Lord. I have a little experiment that I would like to do with you. I want you to do something for me. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I don't want you to think about the answers very hard. I just want the first thing that comes to your mind, right? And I don't want you to say it out loud. Just keep it to yourself. But I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I want you to come up with the first thing that comes to your mind and keep it to yourself. Ready? Okay, first, I want you to think of a color. You have a color. Okay. How many have you who's blue? Yeah, it's about half. It works out to be about half. There's a reason. Partly is because there are only so many colors, and a lot of people like blue. But it's also because you're sitting in a blue room, and you're looking at a guy wearing a blue tie. The simple fact is that human nature predisposes us to overvalue the thing right in front of our eyes. So this is not a conscious act, right? We just assign more importance to things that we can see right now than to things that we can't see right now. Okay, second question for you, second request. I want you to think of the year in which popular music was at its pinnacle, the year with the best music. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because I can't. But I'm willing to bet that you picked a year between your, say, 15th and 25th birthday. It's not true for everybody. There are exceptions. Gary's one of them. But about 80% of people are going to pick sometime between their 15th and their 25th birthday. That's because of another quirk of human nature, and that is that we overvalue what is right now. This is what current events are more important to us than undeniably important stuff that we don't remember, like, say, oh, I don't know, World War I. My last request of you is this, and this is a dangerous one, and I do not want you to blurt it out loud. I want you to keep it to yourself, but I want you to think not of the greatest president in U.S. history, but the worst. Pick your worst. Okay, you've got it? You're wrong. You're all wrong. The undeniably objective answer is James Buchanan. Well, it's true. He dithered his way into the Civil War and probably should have been shot for treason for passively handing over federal armories and naval yards to the Confederates. That's neither here nor there. The reason I ask you that question is that I'm willing to bet that 80% of you, the person you're thinking of has been in office since 1990. So this illustrates not only the fact that we overvalue what happens in our own lifetimes, the things that are happening now, but we also overvalue things that confirm our biases. So we assign more importance to things that confirm what we think we already believe, as opposed to stuff that's contrary to what we think we already believe. We like to imagine that nature reflects our opinions. I try all of that with you because I want to point out to you that you see all of these biases at work right here in the first verses of chapter 24 of the Gospel of Matthew among Jesus' disciples as they're at the temple. The scene here is again, it's the temple in Jerusalem, right? This is not the temple that was built by Solomon. That had been destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BC. This is the temple that was substantially reconstructed in grandiose fashion by Herod. And that would be Herod the Great. This would be the Herod who attempted to kill Jesus as a baby. That guy, right? As they were leaving the temple, Matthew says, Jesus' disciples pointed out these magnificent buildings, and they really were spectacular. Matthew doesn't tell us what they said, but clearly they were impressed. The temple was in front of them. The temple was now, and the general splendor of it confirmed their pre-existing bias toward the entire sacrificial system handed down by Moses. And they assumed that that thing would go on forever. Because they had no idea that the entire purpose of that temple was about to be fulfilled once and for all by Jesus, and that the building and the things that were going on in it would, from that point on, be redundant and useless. You see all these, do you not? Jesus replies here. Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Now that must have been hard to accept. I mean, even from Jesus, right? Try standing in downtown Pittsburgh. Try standing in downtown Pittsburgh and imagining a time in the future when none of it will exist, when it'll just be woods along a riverfront. That's really hard to imagine. The truth is that even when we know better, our bias is toward imagining that what is always will be. We go about our lives on a daily basis as if this is just going to go on forever. It's never going to end. It'll always be like this. But of course, it's not true, right? Barring some divine intervention, the houses in which we live will be torn down, they'll fall down, they'll burn, whatever it happens to be, right? Barring the second coming, everyone you know will die. We know this objectively, but it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it. Barring the coming of Christ in the meantime, every material scrap, everything that you own, your car, your whatever you just bought last week that made you got all excited about, it will rust, it will rot, and it will fall to pieces. It's a simple truth. It will crumble to dust. The temple that must have seemed so permanent, right, had only about 40 years of life left in it. In 70 AD, the Roman Emperor Titus put absolutely everything in it to the torch after stealing anything of value. If you want to see pictures of it, the Romans were so proud of this that they carved it on a column in Rome. And you can see carvings of the soldiers carrying the menorah that stood in the sanctuary, and see them with the tables and the plates and all these things from the temple, carrying them off to be melted down for scrap. That was the lingering doom that haunted Jesus as he sat down here in rabbinical fashion on the Mount of Olives to teach his disciples. But it wasn't the only thing he wanted to talk about. From verses, you read this and you think, well, wait a minute, what is he talking about? Verse to verse, you can be kind of confused, because in one verse it'll sound like he's talking about the destruction of the temple, which happened in 70 AD. In another verse, he's talking very plainly about his return in glory to judge the heavens and the earth. And they're kind of intertwined. And they're intertwined for a reason. They're intertwined because that judgment on Jerusalem was a kind of a foreshadowing, a kind of a sign of the judgment of God on the entire world. From verses 3 to 28, Jesus interweaves these warnings about the end of Jerusalem as the capital city of a Jewish state with warnings about the end of the world, or, I mean, if you like, the beginning of a new world. But this is the important part here. Jesus' warnings about the signs of his coming, about the signs of the end, mean almost exactly the opposite of what most people think they mean. He begins in verse 4 with a warning. He says, "Many will come in his name and say, 'I am the Christ,' and lead many astray," which of course has happened. It has happened in recent history in a very literal way. There is a guy sitting right now in Puerto Rico, whose name I just lost, who claims to be the returned Jesus. And an alarming number of people, he has a church, of course, sort of, and an alarming number of people show up. It's happened over and over again. "You will hear," he adds, "of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains." If you didn't catch that, yeah, Jesus is saying yes. People ask this all the time. Hey, there's a big earthquake, or there's something terrible that happened. Is this a sign that we're coming closer to Jesus' return, to the judgment? And the answer is, well, yeah. The answer is, well, yeah, but not yet. This is the whole point of telling them this. He's not saying, look for these things and then make a timetable and you get prepared, you move to a mountaintop and all these things. He's saying, you look for these things, and when you see them, don't get too excited. Don't get distracted. The end is not yet. These are only the beginning of the birth pains. And in the meantime, some bad stuff can happen. Yes, absolutely. They will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Verse 9 doesn't sound very nice. Many will fall away and betray one another, hate one another, false prophets, lawlessness, and so on. But verse 13, he says, "The one who endures to the end will be saved." And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So don't be surprised. A lot has to happen. A lot has to happen first before the kingdom is consummated. A lot has to happen before the lousy, unfair, unjust things of this world are finally, and they will be, put right by Jesus Christ. What Jesus wants you to do is not to get excited and say, oh, okay, I'm going to build a bunker. Why everybody wants, look, I don't know if this is any of you, but I got to warn you, right? Your bunker and your canned food does not help on the day of judgment. It may help with zombies, but not with divine judgment. So stop it. Anyway, what Jesus wants you to do is to hold steadfast in the faith once delivered to the saints, and to be found at his coming faithful at work in his fields. It really is that simple. There is one criterion. There's one actual, if you want to hang your hat on something here, there is something here. For the end, criterion for the end, it's in verse 14. It is this promise that the gospel of his kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations before the end. That work is well underway. That work is well underway. Our congregation is involved in it. I mean, we support the church planting mission in Sierra Leone among people who have never heard the gospel, who are now hearing the gospel. We don't do it because we're trying to bring about the end of the world. That was an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, not reality. I can't even remember what it was called. It doesn't matter. We're not doing it to bring about the end of the world. We're doing it because Jesus commands us in Matthew 28:19, go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. It's a simple command. The next verses here, the end of this is pretty dark. It does shift the scene back to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. Jesus' point, if you want to sum it up in one word, is run. Judgment is coming on account of the unbelief and the sin of Jerusalem. Do not hesitate, hoping that it might not be as bad as it could be. It's going to be bad. Run. If you hear rumor of the Messiah, do not believe it. Run. Whatever the signs and wonders, run. Because his coming will be the kind of thing that cannot be missed. As it happens, we don't have in the Gospels, but we do have, or in the New Testament, but we do have from some very early writers in the church a tradition that I think is broadly accurate, that in 68 A.D., the Lord spoke to a leader of the congregation in Jerusalem and told them to run. And that before the destruction came on Jerusalem, the church scattered. That the Christians who were living in Jerusalem ran. And that served two purposes. One was that they were spared that suffering, but the other is that the gospel scattered all over the Mediterranean world. That before, where they were all gathered in one place, now they're everywhere. And they're able to share the gospel far and wide. So the point is this. If you want to say, hey, why haven't you told me how I'm going to know, why haven't you told me the date and the time of Christ's return? That's because I can't know it, and neither can you. Why haven't you told me the signs of his return? Well, I just did. But Jesus also tells you, don't get too excited. We overvalue the things that are in front of our eyes. We get too worked up about the stuff that's happening right now. We give too much credence to things that confirm our pre-existing biases. What Jesus wants us to do, wants us to watch for, is very simple, and it's the kind of thing you will not miss. When he comes, you will know it. More on that later. In the meantime, your job is very simple. It's not to be thrown off by those things, but to be steadfast in faith and in service, to be steadfast in the little obedience. We talked about this in Sunday school, in the little obedience, day by day, not even the big things, but the small things, to be steadfast in prayer, to be steadfast in love for others, to be steadfast in worship, to be steadfast in the little details that when they're all lumped together make up life. Are there signs? Sure, there are. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines, all the like. And they are signs that there is something coming, but the end is not yet. Be at work in the fields of the Lord. Amen.